Hi, welcome back to Brenner Childhood Obesity Prevention and Treatment. This section is going to be called Putting Concepts into Practice. My name is Joey Skelton. I'm the director of Brenner and I'm an associate professor of pediatrics as well as epidemiology and prevention. I have nothing to disclose and no conflicts of interest with this presentation. The learning objectives for this section are understanding how the Ellen Satter's division of responsibility model works for all children, learning about the different forms of pressuring children, learn about the eating competency hierarchy, and learn how to implement SDOR into your practice. I'll, in the future, just refer to this as DOR, which represents Ellen Satter's division of responsibility that you learned about earlier. Again, back to the big picture with Ellen Satter's division of responsibility with feeding, what is the parent's role and what is the child's role? The parent is responsible for what, when, and where when it comes to feeding, as well as we've seen in other presentations with activity as well. And the child is responsible for how much and whether. So an important concept in applying this approach to families is this is used very well for children who overeat, children who undereat, as well as for children that are picky eaters. We oftentimes see all of these within one family. A very common scenario is for us to see a child who has overweight or obesity and then has a younger child that is a very picky eater and is of normal weight or even sometimes underweight. This can create significant tensions within the family as well as put additional stress onto their parents. So how to support all eating challenges. And again, some of this is a review, but it's always good to learn. Offer meals and snacks at set times. Avoid substitutions for children that don't want to eat what is served. Remove the pressure to eat, and especially the pressure to eat certain foods. Allow children to spit food out politely if they don't want to eat it. Allowing children to decide the how much, and encourage everyone to eat together at the table with limited distractions. Now, as a group, I want you all to discuss this next topic for about a minute to a minute and a half. In what ways were you pressured to eat as a child? Go ahead and discuss that, and then I'll start back when you're done. So hopefully you guys have had time to discuss in what ways were you pressured to eat as a child. I think we all had that to some extent, especially in my family growing up. If you wanted dessert, you had to eat the vegetables that you were being served. And all of those, as you've seen, can have some impact on how we approach food or our relationship with food. So what happens when we pressure children to eat? Well, there's negative pressure, which is a form of pressuring children to eat. So some of that would be restricting. So not allowing seconds on a certain food item or having seconds at all, or serving smaller portions. There's punishing. If a child doesn't eat their vegetables, making them stay at the table till they clean their plate. Shaming and criticizing, making fun of one child who doesn't like something on their plate, or a child who might be overweight or obese and is going for seconds and making comments about how it's making them gain weight. Begging children to eat something, oftentimes what we call the no thank you bite, or trying to plead or bribe them to try certain foods. Withholding desserts is a very common one that I mentioned earlier, that if they don't eat certain foods on their plate, then they don't get to have dessert after that meal. Serving the veggies first, which is a common approach sometimes in adult-based weight loss, but within children, have them not actually liking the vegetables because they pick up that pressure to eat the veggies. Nonverbal cues such as eye rolling or watching what they're doing, or making sounds when their children are eating. And only offering healthy food. That oftentimes, especially if you're trying to make changes within a home, wanting to change to healthier food is a great thing to do. But if the change is too sudden and you're only offering the healthy foods, the kids then learn to not really enjoy meals at that home after that. So offering a variety of foods, oftentimes mixing in some of the favorites with maybe some of these other foods that you're wanting your family to eat more of. So all of these are forms of negative pressuring that children easily pick up on when their parents are trying to make changes within the home to help with their child's weight. There's also positive forms of pressuring. While they might seem positive, so therefore good, they will oftentimes have that same negative negative result that we see with the negative pressuring. So some forms of positive pressuring, of cheering children, or praising them, that if they're eating eating a new food or eating more of a healthy food, calling attention to it and praising and cheering them for doing that. That can really backfire maybe if there's another child in the family who's a picky eater or doesn't like that food that's being offered. Praising and cheering can definitely backfire. Rewarding children for eating certain foods or trying foods, or eating less of a food, while it might have a short-term benefit, in the long term, rewarding kids for certain eating behaviors will backfire. Bribing them, you can have seconds on your meat if you eat more of your vegetables, or if you clean your plate tonight, then you can have some extra TV. But bribing oftentimes has the same effect as you would see with rewarding. Reminding them that constant, hey, don't forget your vegetables over here. All of us are guilty of that within our kids. It's a normal response, but definitely can turn into that sort of positive pressuring that will have the opposite effect that we're aiming for. Talking about nutrition during foods, especially with children that are 13, 14, and younger, even though we'd recommend not doing it even with older kids unless it was something that they brought up. But talking about the nutritional effect for food, again, takes away from the child focusing on their plate and focusing on the feeding process. Talking about how great the food is. This can oftentimes backfire as kids start to become more autonomous and develop their own identity. Talking about how great the food is and how much they like it can end up having the negative response that we would like. All of these forms of pressuring, while positive, will end up resulting in having the opposite effect, and the child actually having a negative response to what you're trying to achieve. This is a great quote from Ellen Satter. Pressure can be hard to detect. Ask yourself why you're doing something with feeding. Is it to get your child to eat more, less, or different food than he does on his own? If so, it is pressure. So here's a real life situation that we're going to go through, and I'm going to give you guys a minute to discuss this with your group. A mom expresses concern about her daughter eating too much. She's trying to trust her to make her own food choices. Recently, mom cooked her daughter's favorite meal of chicken Alfredo. This mom is practicing using the DOR approach. However, she is struggling with not pressuring her daughter to eat less. Using the DOR model, what would you suggest? Take a minute and discuss this with your group. So hopefully that gave you guys time to discuss it. Overall, what we would recommend is reassure mom to continue practice trusting her daughter to eat the amount she needs at the scheduled times. Trust the process and be patient. Her overeating will likely not change overnight. You can encourage her mom to be aware of any subtle nonverbal cues that may feel like pressure. Explore with mom about the schedule, as this may help her to not overeat at meal times. Also, explore how to make the meal more satisfying by adding more variety to the meal. You could also discuss what is offered for snack. Is she able to create a two food group snack from what is offered within the home? All of these things are really going to impact the amount of food that that child eats at that meal. Here's another real life situation. A grandmother discusses that her grandson is a picky eater. Most nights she will make him a separate meal because he does not like what has been prepared for dinner. After talking about DOR with the grandmother, she says, "I just can't stand to see him go to bed hungry." Using the DOR model, what would you suggest? All right, hopefully that gave you guys enough time to discuss it. We would probably suggest acknowledging to the grandmother that it's hard to see him go to bed hungry. Honor her feelings of what she's staying there. But what we know is that if she can follow DOR by not offering substitutions, she'll be able to teach him that he can make do with what he's being offered at most meals. It's important to be considerate at meals by offering something that he can make do with at the meal. If he does not like the soup that is offered, she could add fruit and bread, which she knows he will like, and will also balance out that meal. If she continues to offer substitutions, he will never venture out and try new and challenging foods. All right, here's another one that I'll read through and then give you guys a minute to discuss as a group. A mom shares her confusion around trying to get her overweight child to eat less and her underweight child to eat more. The overweight child sees the underweight child eating whatever she wants. This makes the overweight child want to eat, and mom struggles with knowing what to do. Using the DOR model, what would you suggest? Take a minute and discuss as a group. Okay, hopefully that gave you all enough time to discuss. So using DOR, we know that it can be applied to all children regardless of weight and eating challenges. Pressuring children to eat more almost always backfires, and they'll end up eating less. Pressuring children to eat less will also backfire, and the children end up eating more. When everyone follows a schedule for eating and trust is in place, kids can learn how to become competent eaters. This scenario that we are providing you here is something that we see quite often, and it can be quite a struggle for parents to implement this when they're struggling with eating issues that are opposite in two different children. So how to get this started in your practice? So first, understand the family. So this is Ellen Satter's eating competency hierarchy. So I'm going to come back to this in just a second. So When we're dealing with families that have issues with their weight, before we talk about the what of what they're eating, it's important to recognize where your patient and their family is within this eating competency hierarchy. You can give all the nutrition advice you want, but whether they can and will do it depends on where they are within this hierarchy. As we discussed earlier, Ellen Satter is a dietitian and has a master's in social work and has worked with families, both adults and children, to try to make positive behavior changes that can improve their relationship with food. From years of experience, she had created this model. This model is similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the basis of it is families and people need their physiologic needs met: food, air, water, and shelter, safety and security, social affection, self-esteem, and self-actualization, which moves up the pyramid. But before they can reach those higher levels of self-esteem and self-actualization, they must have their physiologic needs met. So looking at Ellen Satter's eating competency hierarchy, we learn and grow in a sequence, and that once our needs at each level are satisfied, we become aware of this and address the needs at the next level. When we are helping families to be more competent with eating, we can be most helpful when we meet them where they are. This hierarchy is a tool that we can use to understand where a particular family might be. So what to ask to assess where the patient might be? Do they have enough food? Having enough food to eat, do you feel like you're getting enough food to eat? Are there times when you have plenty to eat and are there times when you feel you don't? Do you worry about getting enough to eat? So before we start talking about changing the food that they're eating, we really need to find out, do they even have enough food? Because that's going to be a much bigger priority for that family. Next is acceptable food. Having access to food that you consider as acceptable, which is very personal to each individual person. Do you have food you enjoy? What foods do you include regularly? Do you have enough of these foods so that your family gets enough to eat? Do you feel you have enough food that you like to eat from day to day? What are those foods? These are very important questions to ask as you assess, when you assess making changes, that you know what they're going to find acceptable at this time. Next is reliable, ongoing access to food. Having reliable access to acceptable food. Someone even described this as having food security, not just today, but also tomorrow and in the future. Tell me about your family's schedule around eating. Do you get hungry between meals and snacks? Are there typical times that your family eats? Next is good tasting food, not just acceptable food or reliable access, but are they enjoying the food? Do you allow yourself to eat good tasting food by honoring your appetites? You might ask questions like, what foods do you like best? Do you plan to eat foods that taste good to you? How often do you go about finding foods that taste good to you? Do you explore trying new foods? So not all good tasting food has to be healthy, or does it always need to be unhealthy, but just trying to recognize what they consider to be good tasting food. Next is novel foods. Another way to describe this is just having new foods or having new interest in foods that you do not normally eat, or preparing food in different ways or trying different cuisine. Do you enjoy trying new foods? When do you usually try something new? Are you reluctant to try new or different foods? This can often be a big point of contention within families as there's pressure to try new and different foods and fighting against picky eating. And finally, instrumental foods, eating food for health or religious reason. Do you follow any type of special diet for health or personal reasons? Do you feel stressed or conflicted about following an instrumental food diet? This is oftentimes where people are wanting to get to. They want to eat foods that are going to make them healthier, but unfortunately, they'll try that before they're addressing some of these other issues, such as having enough food, acceptable food, reliable access to food, good tasting food, as well as novel food. If a family's food insecure and they struggle with having enough food, then they probably are not going to be choosing new novel foods or instrumental foods. They're not going to be interested in trying foods that they have never eaten before. Also, know that just like with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, very few people are actually self-actualized. The same is true with eating competence. Very few people are going to be at the level of choosing instrumental foods. choosing foods to achieve a spiritual, emotional, or physical outcome. So that was very conceptual, and sometimes that can be hard to follow. So here's a way to apply it to your patients every day. Think about where on the hierarchy is your patient, and think about it very simply. These people can be on very opposite ends of the spectrum. On one end, having instrumental food, which we would say would be increasing fruits and veggies, eating more whole grains, increase in healthy fats and decrease in saturated fats, and decrease in salt intake. So what we need to do with most of our patients before we talk about the what with feeding, our initial reaction is to work on the top of the hierarchy, or instrumental foods, when in reality not everyone's going to be there, even though if you follow social media and read the news, we feel it makes us think that we all should be there, but in reality we're not. So you might want to approach the family, instead of thinking about instrumental foods on the left, think about, do they have enough food? Are they getting regular access to food so they're not going hungry? So a common example that we're going to provide with you here is trying to get people to add more fruits and veggies to their meals. Well, once you begin asking about, do they have regular access to food, you might discover that they usually only cook one food group per meal because they're not sure they can afford more. And they're kind of scared to buy more with each meal because they're unsure if their children will eat it, and they'll end up wasting food when they don't have a lot of food to go around. They may not have pot holders or have limited cooking skills or be on a very small budget. So trying to add a lot of new adventurous foods or cooking in different ways might not be practical for them. So for this family that has a very limited budget or has other struggles in having enough food, why would we start talking about adding more fruits and vegetables if that's going to be an impossible task for them? The clinician as well as the family thought that's what they're supposed to be talking about and what they're supposed to be trying, but they kept failing at this goal. For this family, we need to figure out how to get them enough food and then work our way steadily up the hierarchy. So as care providers, how can we help? Well, first of all, families take small steps, and change can be very slow. Let families be in charge of what they want to change. Families know what they need to change mostly, but just may not know how to go about it. As a provider, we can guide them to the best place to start. For example, if they don't have any structure to their eating, adding fruits and vegetables is not really going to be a very successful goal for them to set. Keep the focus on habits and behaviors. This can cause a parent to become restrictive, cause tension in the family, and can even lead to unhealthy and unsafe behaviors if we just focus on weight. As a provider, we can get anxious about a child's weight, and that gets us off track on how to really help the family. Staying with the DOR model will guide you as a provider to help that family and child's long-term health. Help the parent to focus more on the family making changes versus singling out a single child. This is extremely important because children can be made to feel very guilty and very different if it's just about them. With the DOR model, this can apply to the entire family. Even parents need the discipline of having structured meals and snacks. Encourage the parents to be a role model with making change. Resist focusing on weight. This can cause a parent, again, to become restrictive, cause tension in the family, and can even lead to unhealthy and unsafe behaviors like skipping meals. Focusing on weight only almost always leads to restriction. The science tells us that restriction causes weight gain. The research is done on this. Be supportive, encouraging, and understanding. Behavior change is hard and takes time. If the child and family are struggling with change, criticism or fear will only make things worse. Be their partner in the process. They trust you and want your support. So much research is coming out now that by taking an accepting approach and supporting the family, they're much more likely to have long-term success. Teaching DOR to your families. So this is a handout that's provided with your materials, and this is something that was very good to use in that first clinic session that you have with a family to address feeding behaviors and even obesity. It's also a great guide to goal setting. So starting on that left-hand side is an introduction to Ellen Satter's division of responsibility in feeding, and it calls attention to how frustrating sometimes feeding can be for parents. The next section, it reminds them, what do we really want for our kids in the long term? We want them to eat the right amount of food, to have a better relationship with food, to eat a variety of foods during meals and snacks, and to grow into healthy adults. And then this introduces the different roles between the parent's role of when, where, and what, and the child's role of how much and whether. On the back side of the page is Ellen Satter's Division of Responsibility screener form. And this is for parents to fill out that can help guide them as well as yourself in setting some initial goals and knowing where to focus education, where parents answer the question of when, where, and what, and then answering questions for their children of how much and whether, including questions of pressure. I do not pressure my children to eat more. I do not pressure my children to eat less. Other handouts that help support the goal setting. These are very focused. Depending on how your parents answer, it's very focused on what the family needs to work on. So how to use this. After a family selects their first goal from the SDOR check-in, refer to the appropriate sheet for further discussion and education. Have the family check the box with the goal they are planning to work on. Write details about the goal based on the family interest, and the family takes the handout home to help be a reminder to practice the goal. So these are not necessarily sheets just to be handed to families, but to actually go through it with them. This handout that's shown here on when with feeding and eating, it teaches them again why eating on a schedule is important, provides education on how often children and adults should eat. It gives an example schedule to help sort of prompt them to set their own eating schedule and structure. And then it has some options as far as what goal they would like to choose, and then some details about the goal. So using this to walk the family through the process can be very helpful. Again, all of these handouts are provided to you, as well as having a link that has more details about goal setting. The one shown here is about a family eating schedule, so you can sit down and walk through breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner, what times they do it on weekdays and what time on weekends. We find this extremely helpful and a very realistic approach to working with families when they're trying to develop a schedule around eating. And this takes us through two more handouts that are provided to parents about the parent's role, the where and the what. Why is eating together at a table important? How do we get started? How do we know when your family's ready to start making changes to what you eat and how to get started? Again, all these have been provided to you. And then this one addresses the role of the child, how much and whether. But again, this is focused on the parent, working with the parent and not necessarily directly with the child, who's just going to be too young to understand many of these concepts. Again, it takes it through some of the educational components of how much and whether, why it is important to trust children to eat the amount that they need. By trusting children with their role of how much or whether, children can then learn to eat the right amounts, and so on and so forth. It provides sample goals for them to set, as well as space to write down additional details about that goal for the family. All of these handouts really are used to support your interaction with the family in setting appropriate goals. But also, we've adapted the Ellen Satter's Division of Responsibility to be used with physical activity. Going through what parents want for their children, the parent's role and the child's role of how much and whether. And then on the back of that page, there's the screening questionnaire for the DOR for activity, asking parents questions about when, where, and what, and then in regards to their children, how much and whether. From that, families can then set their own goals of what they would like to work on based on that screener. An educational handout here about what, when, and where for activity, tips for scheduling activity, um, ways to make activity enjoyable, an example schedule, example goals, and then space to write more details about the goal. On the back side of that page is some activity ideas to work with for families. Now this might seem a little different than what we were doing with feeding, but we've learned over time families have really gotten out of the routine of doing enjoyable games together. And so we've found that actually providing very simplistic examples of things that they can do, families are able to choose one, and they oftentimes very much enjoy doing these activities together. You see some of the examples that we've had great success with of hula hooping, having a relay tag obstacle course, things that you might associate with school or camp. There's no reason that families can't do this together. Now, this handout is not for your patients, but is for providers' use only. And it goes through some very common things that you're going to encounter from your patients and families, and gives you guidance on how to deal with that. I think these are things that we hear almost every single day in clinic. I'm concerned about their weight, and you're saying that they can eat as much as they want. That's oftentimes how parents will initially interpret DOR when they learn about it, and this gives you some guidance on how to answer that question. If I don't force him to eat his vegetables, he's only going to eat them eaten starch. This, again, is something we hear quite often when we're having parents lift that restriction. And it helps to remind them that in the long run, you're not going to be there for the rest of their life trying to goad them into eating their fruits and vegetables, but you want them to learn how to eat them, learn how to try new foods, and using this approach is going to be the best way to do that. What if my child eats so much he gets sick? You can see here that we give example to walk parents through that. Well, what do you think he might learn from that, and give them time to respond? Oftentimes, what usually occurs from this is the child may not feel very good after he eats that much, and he's much less likely to do it the next time. Avoid telling the child who gets sick from eating too much, "I told you so." That's going to end up causing a very negative interaction and overall a negative experience with that meal the next time they eat it. So oftentimes when we hear this from parents, we often say, let the child learn about eating too much from that. They're very unlikely to do that again in the long term. So what about snacks? This is a great point to discuss issues such as hunger and feeding. And so again, as an example, to bring them back to the schedule with eating. So snacks are not something that they can have open access to, but are used at scheduled times. What if my child doesn't eat at all? Do I send them to bed hungry? Again, being able to let them learn from the experience of not eating. Always remember that being considerate without catering. Have something on that plate that they're going to want to eat, but not preparing them another meal, which is just going to teach them not to eat the food that they're served. So again, this is a great thing to read through periodically as you encounter these questions and help practice your responses to the family. So in a similar sense, we have this for providers that guides them more support when dealing with activity. What are some exercises my child can do to lose more weight? And again, this gives you an opportunity to take it off of the idea of exercise, which can become intimidating to children and even something that's negative that they don't enjoy, but focusing on activity, but also having structure with the activity, planning times that they can go be active with you or friends and other family members together to the point that they really get to enjoy it. How do I lose weight in my belly, arms, and legs? Remind families that each person is totally different and how they lose weight is going to be totally different. If they try to target certain areas, they're likely to be disappointed. They really need to focus on overall health and then later weight loss. Sweating burns more calories, right? So sweating usually results from activity or movement. So everyone is very different. So some kids may not sweat as much as others, and that may not indicate the level of activity they have. The main point is getting up and being active as much as they can and as much as they can enjoy. Why is play important? Sometimes forcing activity on younger children ends up backfiring, because that's what we think in the United States, is that to lose weight we got to exercise. But for younger kids, play is exercise. It works all the muscles in the body and has a lot of other developmental benefits as well. And then how much should we exercise a week? This gets to be a real tricky question, as people are wanting to find out how much they need to make their kids be active in order to lose weight. And so we just tend to keep it very general about activity. For children under the age of 18, to be active for about an hour. Adults need to be physically active for about 30 minutes a day. However, that is oftentimes a long-term goal. So we want to start from where they are, meet them where they are, and build up from there to increase their activity slowly. We provided posters that you can post in patient rooms that oftentimes can be used as a conversation starter. We love this cook, eat, play, repeat, which you can also see that we have in Spanish. This gets them focused on the aspects of health that they can do as a family, and not something that could lead to discord within the family, such as exercising for 30 minutes a day and other things like that that can result in having increased pressure on the children. We have other handouts and booklets that you can use in clinic, provide to your patients, that give even more detailed tips around cook, eat, play, repeat. You can see here it can be used, again, as a great conversation starter, or use it to walk families through. Cook more meals at home, cook and eat meals together, plan what you're going to make in advance, and add variety to your meals to balance out that plate. Eat together as a family, schedule and eat 3 meals and 1 to 2 snacks at regular times during the day. Try to have focus to enjoy your meal by turning off electronics and having fewer distractions, and enjoying foods without guilt. And then play together as a family. Group play is much more fun. Play often. Try to take time every day to be physically active and play. Do activities that are going to make that heart rate go up. That's the kind of the main guideline that we want for kids, is you want to do activities that are going to make their heart beat faster. And also recognizing the positive health effects from food beyond weight loss. Most of the effects of exercise on our bodies has to do with the beneficial effects, such as an improvement in our health, blood pressure, our ability to concentrate, and not as much on the weight loss. So just recognize that exercise has lots of beneficial effects for our bodies. If you have any questions about any part of this presentation, please email us at brennerfit@wakehealth.edu. You could also discuss some of this right now, some parts that you have more questions about or anticipating future challenges. Discuss those as a group, and please reach out to us for more information or other ways that we can support you guys in instituting a lot of this program within your own clinics. Thank you all for participating in these educational sessions. It was really fun for us to do this, and we are really excited about more people learning this approach that has benefited over 1,000 families in our programs over the past 11 to 12 years, and we hope that you guys will have great success with it as well. Thank you so much.